Welcome, everyone, to the My HR Genius HR Best Practices webinar. Move the slide here. My name is Kevin Mosher, and I am happy to present this month. This is July 2021. Hard to imagine. Key is we're not 2020 anymore. So July 2021, although recently it starts to feel like a little bit more like 2020, unfortunately, and I guess that's something that we're going to have to talk about today. That was not contemplated when I was doing these, when I was putting this presentation together, not contemplated that we would start to have conversations again about wearing masks and whether or not to go back into the workplace. So again, new topics for us to discuss today on the presentation. Every year we do two kind of like legal update presentations as part of the HR Best Practices webinar series, normally in July and normally in January, where we look to see what happened or what's going to happen and kind of do a recap and a little bit of prognostication as well. So kind of a catch up. And so this is the July 2021 catch up to see, what happened in the first few months or first 6 months of the year and how did that align with, what we were kind of thinking might happen as well. So anyway, really excited to present this webinar to you. Some housekeeping things. If you are new to the webinar, welcome. And I am happy to have you. And if you have any questions, you are welcome. There's a Q&A box on your screen. You're welcome to type into it. And if I see it, I will try to, and if we haven't addressed the question already, I will try to answer your question. If I get inundated, I'll try to circle back to you after the presentation is over. If you need HRCI credits or CLEs or SHRM credits, hopefully you indicated that when you registered, but if you didn't and you still need the certification, once we review attendance, which we have to do, no codes in this one or anything, but once we review attendance, then we'll send out, within the next week, send out the certifications to you so that you can have a fancy certification for your SHRM and HRCI credits, or CLEs, I guess, as well, if that's what you need. Okay, so let's move on. Oh yeah, this is me. Really need a new picture. So anyway, I'm a certified labor and employment law specialist, and yeah, this is like all the sorts of things I do: counsel businesses and nonprofits and the like on complying with HR and labor and employment laws. If you are not a member, I know a lot of you are members of the My HR Genius program, which is fantastic. And if you're not a member, we have a subscription-based program, very unique. I don't know of any other law firm in the industry that does this sort of thing, but it includes basically unlimited, phone calls, emails about any of your HR strategy questions, how to fire people, compliance questions, whatever you need, you name it. You can call us at $79 a month for the base program. It also includes additional information, additional education to this webinar, including like podcasts and HR tips that go out every week on legal updates and Q&A and that sort of thing. So I think it's a very robust program for $79 a month, and it's an HR person's best friend. Okay, all right. So today, I think that's all the housekeeping stuff I've got. So today, let's dive into the presentation itself. We are going to talk about a number of things, some of which are not on these slides, just because things have changed in the last few weeks since I put together the slide deck, and it's just there's a lot to talk about in just the last few weeks. So we're going to talk about the American Rescue Plan Act, which was big news back in like March when it was passed. Seems like so long ago, but now it's, kind of old news. But we're going to talk about some of the details because they are still very applicable. Most of the benefits and stuff are extended through the end of September. So, you might be in the throes of implementing the American Rescue Plan Act benefits, and will be until the end of September. And so we'll talk about that. I don't, in the political climate and everything, if you had asked me 2 weeks ago, I'd say absolutely not. There's no way that there's going to be any continuation of any of these benefits, like the FFCRA and the COBRA premium subsidy. And I still think that that's true. But with COVID kind of making a resurgence of some sorts in some parts of the country, who knows? Maybe, I don't know. Maybe the government finds another couple $100 billion to throw at these extended benefits. So we'll talk about that. We'll talk about return to work, which has really been the topic of the year for businesses. Again, changes. What does that look like now that there's another wave of COVID occurring, and what does it mean? There's, I hate to say a conversation in the news. I don't think that sort of thing happens, but you're starting to see news articles like in the New York Times, Wall Street Journal, Washington Post. You're starting to see articles about maybe we shouldn't be returning to work. Maybe employers should be mandating vaccinations. I will tell you that I think a lot more employers are contemplating mandatory vaccinations today versus a month ago, and in part because they probably want employees to, I think a lot of businesses want employees to return to work, but a lot of businesses, probably every business, has a percentage of the employee pool that is just not getting vaccinated, and that creates risk, right? And so, I think these conversations around vaccination are ongoing and evolving. We'll talk about some updated OSHA guidance that we got in May from OSHA, as well as just general overview of minimum wage increases, the brand new non-compete executive order, which seems to be like completely misunderstood by the general media population. So we're going to talk about what it actually means. And then we'll talk about some state-specific stuff, including a total overview of the Texas Civil Rights Act and, what that might mean for everybody down in, with employees down in Texas, because there are a lot of changes down in Texas, or will be a lot of changes. So, okay, let's jump into the American Rescue Plan Act. Again, I know it's been like old news because it's been in effect since April. But what did the American Rescue Plan Act do, at least with regard to employers? So that we want to talk about today. So I'm just going to pick and choose. The first thing it did is it extended the voluntary nature of the FFCRA. Now, the FFCRA from a mandatory nature for covered employers, which is most employers, except for really small employers that wanted to exempt themselves, right? So like if, during COVID, we talked about the FFCRA all the time, right? If you go back and I did multiple webinars on it. I did podcasts on it. The FFCRA was a big deal in 2020, and because it was mandatory that if the employees couldn't come into work or they couldn't work in the office, then they had the opportunity to get some paid sick leave, and that would be reimbursed dollar for dollar by the federal government, just in case you're not familiar with it. Starting January 1, that became voluntary. So the government was still, they extended it. So if the employees had not used their full 12 weeks of FFCRA leave in 2020, they were able to use it up through, the first months of 2021. It wasn't a brand new period. It was just a voluntary period. Now, I will just say, like, anecdotally, from what I've seen, most employers did not extend voluntary FFCRA sick leave. And the reason is because employees, again, anecdotally, but I think there's enough evidence, a lot of employees abused the bejesus out of the FFCRA in 2020. And I think it kind of ticked off a lot of employers. And so why continue voluntarily to give them this paid time off? There's also a sense that employees had plenty of time off when they were working from home because they really weren't working all that hard. Obviously, that's not the case 100% across the board, but I think there's a general sense from a lot of businesses out there that employees were just not really putting in the same level of effort when they're working from home and they're taking nice walks and they're jumping on their treadmill and they're doing yoga classes. And obviously, being a little sarcastic on this, but the point is a lot of employers chose not to. I think most employers chose not to extend the FFCRA, even though the federal government was going to reimburse you for any expenditure under it. Well, that then expired, and under the American Rescue Plan, it got extended through the end of September. It also got, it was also expanded so that it included, as of like April, it included medical employers. So in the medical industry, medical industry employers. And there was a lot of debate. We don't need to get into 2020 debate, but there was a lot of debate because they were, for the most part, excluded from having to mandatorily offer paid sick leave to employees. And there's a lot of reasons for it. We don't need to get into it. But the reality is, the upshot is that as of April 1 of 2021, all employers in the United States have been able to offer FFCRA with a brand new 12-week benefit period through the end of September. It's going to expire October 1. We'll see if it gets extended. I don't see it happening. Maybe. I just don't see it happening. And I don't think there's a lot of use. I just don't think it's being used very, very heavily anyway by employers and employees. Okay, so that's FFCRA. So that's out there for those of you that are using it. Great. For those of you that aren't using it, that's fine too. I haven't seen any like complete up in arms strikes over this by employees who are like, "Why aren't you giving me FFCRA?" I haven't seen those people out there protesting on the streets yet. They did change around, just in case you're interested, and just in case you've been on this, you would know that they did change around the criteria for using the FFCRA. So it does differ slightly from what we saw in 2020. And I'm not going to get into the details because most of you on this call probably decided not to opt into the FFCRA. I will say this, if you did decide to opt into the FFCRA, I think you're into it through the end of September. Like, I don't think you can end it prematurely. So for any of the employees that do meet the criteria for the FFCRA, the expanded FFCRA, I think that you should be extending that to them through the end of September. Similar to the FFCRA, the EFMLA was in the FFCRA. Well, anyway, it's all part of the same thing. But the EFMLA goes up to the 12 weeks. And again, they changed the criteria a little bit, but just like with the FFCRA with the 2-week paid sick leave period, this is extended out. So again, just like very similar to what we saw in 2020, there are some slight nuances to the EFMLA, but again, most employers, most of you on this call probably did not opt in for that. Now, bigger deal from the ARPA is that, and a lot of people didn't seem to get the memo on this, so I'm not sure. The government, they kicked this out really quickly, so I don't, that's fine, but this is something I did not see coming. So if you look at my January or February prognostication, I did not see that they were going to that the government was going to pay for COBRA for employees. So if the employee is involuntarily terminated, then has been involuntarily terminated by the company, then the company, assuming the employee elects COBRA, the company is supposed to pay for it, pay for the full premium. And then the company, like with the FFCRA, will get reimbursed by the federal government. Now, the really interesting thing about this, and this is just through the end of September again, the federal fiscal year starts on October 1. That's why everything ends September 30th. So they've only got budgeted through the end of September. The interesting thing is that, and the complicated thing, is that it went retroactive. So if any employee, as of I think it was like April 1, if any employee could have elected, would still be in their like 18-month period into like after April 1, and they could retroactively elect COBRA starting April 1, 2021, and get it paid for by the employer, which then gets reimbursed by the government. Notices of all of this were supposed to go out. I think, yes, here it is, on this slide. I think on this slide, maybe the next slide. Anyway, notices for all this were supposed to go out in May, I believe. And just, I'd be really curious to know how many employees, former employees, actually jumped back into the employer's group medical plan on COBRA. I just haven't heard of a lot of those situations. I think a lot of the employees have, moved on and got their own, employer coverage. That's likely what happened. But it's really interesting that employees who might have been, gone out of your organization, fired over a year ago, or less than 18 months ago, as of April 1, could have elected back into your plan and spent the rest of their time up to the 18-month period on paid COBRA. Very, very complicated, very interesting, very paperwork heavy. I'm sure your group medical providers and COBRA administrators were enjoying all the deluge of work that came to them in May and June in figuring this all out. But for most of you, if you didn't know and you're doing your own administration, just know you were supposed to have provided notice, and that anybody going out on COBRA needs to be given notice telling them that their COBRA is going, anybody who's involuntarily terminated. It doesn't cover all COBRA situations. That they need to be notified that they are entitled to this benefit through the end of September if they elect COBRA, that it'll be paid for by the employer, and obviously the employer gets reimbursed. So here's the second chance. So to these former employees that since like November or so of 2019, if they were no longer, if they were involuntarily fired, that those second chance employees needed to be notified by May 31st of 2021. And I totally understand a lot of this is water under the bridge, but this is a review of 2021, and this was kind of a big deal for HR and benefits people in 2021, right? So a lot of you probably spent a lot of hours of your life, of your working life working on this COBRA stuff. And so, it's great. I'm sure everybody really, really appreciated it, but it was just kind of out of the blue from the federal government with very little notice, and to implement this and get it going. I mean, it was like days of notice before the April 1st deadline, by the time that they passed the ARPA. So that's the COBRA premium. Yes, just more about the refundability mechanism for that. So now let's move on to return to work, because there's just a lot to unpack with return to work. And if you had asked me a year ago if we'd be all back in the office, I think a year ago I would have expected that we'd be all back in the office. I probably didn't expect that so many people would be vaccinated. But I mean, it's just amazing the way that they were able to create that. Just absolutely amazing how they created that vaccine and got it through approval and everything in December, and started to roll it out to people in December and January, especially when they started rolling it out. So, okay, a lot of you probably have employees still working from home. Maybe your companies are entirely working from home. Downtown St. Paul, when I'm right now looking out of my office, is still kind of Deadsville. The larger employers have not, including the county, have not returned to work. And so the streets are pretty much desolate. A lot of your smaller mid-sized employers, like Thompson Co., for example, are back at work and buildings are filling up. But the bigger employers, for whatever reason, have not pivoted back to working from the office. And given Minnesota's not really experiencing a big wave of, Minnesota's highly, I think it's approaching around 80% vaccination or 75%. Anyway, it's pretty high. So Minnesota is not really much of the experiencing much of the problem, and certainly not the Twin Cities. But I know that's not the case in a lot of the country. So it makes sense to me that a lot of employers are now rethinking their stance on whether or not to mandate vaccinations. And we're going to talk about that in a minute. So let me just talk about, what does it mean to return to work? Well, one thing that has not changed in decades, COVID didn't change it, SARS didn't change it, flu didn't change it. None of the, popular sicknesses and stuff that are, illnesses, whatever it is, diseases that are going around have changed the basic premise that OSHA has, that an employer needs to maintain a safe work environment, free of known hazards. Now, the Department of Labor has yet to characterize COVID as a hazard, and that's a big deal. And so I haven't seen yet where the Department of Labor is considering OSHA to be a hazard. And so, do you still as an employer, does that mean you can just ignore OSHA? Absolutely not. There's a lot of protocol. There's a lot of guidance from the Department of Labor and the CDC about what to do. There's a lot of expectations from employees that they want to come back to work and be in a safe work environment. Recent polling, for whatever value that has, recent polling is indicating that the number one reason, by just a little bit, but the number one reason that employees don't want to come back to work is fear of COVID and fear for their safety, which to me I find amazing, and it's a really high percentage because the vaccine seems to work. And so if you're vaccinated, I guess it doesn't even cross my mind that it would be unsafe for me to come into the workplace after being vaccinated. But there's a lot of people, and I know vaccines aren't 100%, but they're pretty close. They're pretty close, and we've had a lot of people vaccinated. So for those people, your chances are very, 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 very slim that you're going to, pick up COVID from a coworker if you've gotten vaccinations. Now, it depends on the vaccination. I think the one that they're using in Europe isn't working so much, but I can't remember off the top of my head which one that is. But the ones that were green-lighted in the United States seem to be pretty effective against the new Delta variant and everything. So, but it's still out there. People still seem to be scared. The second reason people want to not come back to the workplace is they just really like working from home. Shocking. You don't have a boss breathing on your neck. You don't have to do all the office politics-y type things. You don't have to get dressed necessarily. I mean, whatever. There's just a lot of people have gotten used to working from home, and there's a good percentage of people that don't want to come back because of that. But what employees really, when they talk about the anxiety about returning to work, and again, there's a lot of employees that have anxiety. For me, it's like I never wanted to leave the workplace. like love The Office, and I understand I seem to be an outlier in that situation, but a lot of employees have anxiety about coming back to work, and so a communication protocol is really, really critical. There's just been a lot of there seems to be a differentiator between the employers that are really successful with so far in 2021 with returning employees to work, are those employers that are developing well-reasoned policies that are then being communicated to employees. And so if you're just like sending out, you've got a company of like 50 people and you're just sending out a group-wide email or having a call and you're like, hey, yeah, we're all coming back to work. We're doing it next week. That's going to be a major problem. And I'm not like, look, I look from the employer perspective all the time. And to me, I'm like, yeah, get back into work like next week. I get it. But people have kids. People have expectations. People have arranged schedules, and things like that around working from home. They need time. And they need time, and a lot of them have anxiety. A lot of them might have younger children that aren't vaccinated, so there's some concern and fear and everything. So it's just really, really critical that a policy be drafted, and that that a policy gets drafted, and that it gets well communicated out there. And I thought this slide, I'm not sure why this slide is here. I think somehow the order got off. But anyway, just a little throwing it out there in California, tracking COVID layoffs in the hospitality industry. That very interesting, something to watch for. Hopefully this is only a California thing, though I know they are talking about it at a federal level. I can't imagine the administration is going to get a ton of like bipartisan support for this, but this is a total pro-union law in California. But in California, new law that basically said, just for the hospitality industry, that if you've been laid off during COVID, so basically like since 2020, you're allowed to get notice of recall, and basically you get the first shot at coming back to work, and you can continue to say, like my understanding is like you can continue to say no, and then but the company, the hospitality company, needs to continue to give you notice of the job openings so that you can like jump back in. Right. So this is just very strange, right? It's kind of like a union situation where you would give laid off employees in the union, you'd give them notice that a job is opened up so that they have the opportunity to jump in, to, bump into the job. That's the same thing now in California in the hospitality industry. Very unique, very pro-employee law. I don't think anybody's going to be all that surprised by that. So before we get into this, I do want to talk about, and somebody even asked a question, so thank you for that, about returning to work stuff. So one of the questions that we have is about vaccinations. And actually, I'm just going to forward the slide. So we'll talk about vaccinations right here. Okay, thank you. So with regard to vaccinations, there's a few things. First of all, can you vaccinate? No. The answer to that is no, you can't vaccinate. Don't vaccinate your employees. That's not allowed. Can you mandate that your employees get vaccinated? Yes, you can mandate. It's a condition of employment. You can mandate that they get vaccinated. Now, we've got a few states, mainly Texas. I think it's Texas, Montana, Florida, or Georgia. I think Florida. Anyway, Texas being the big one. Texas passed an executive order, by the governor. I don't think it's a law, but they passed a rule saying that employers can't yeah, somebody said the slides being discussed are different than the presentation that was downloaded. Yeah, and I totally apologize. I don't know why the slide, what happened with this slide. I don't have an explanation, but I think all the slides are in here somewhere. So I'm on the updated OSHA guidance slide. If you're looking at the downloaded PowerPoint that was emailed out to you. So apologies if you're not watching the live presentation, but you're just following along on the PowerPoint. So Texas, for example, passed a rule saying that businesses can't disqualify people from entering their premises as a customer based on their vaccination status, right? So if you can't have a sign on the door that says no shoes, no shirt, no vaccination, no service, right? You can't do that now in Texas. But that rule didn't cover employers. So there are a few states out there that are looking to have rules around employers where employers are, aren't able to ask about the vaccination status. But at this point, I don't think there are any actual laws. And the federal government's, generally, so we'll just talk about the federal government. The federal government's made it very clear that you can mandate vaccinations by your employees, and that you can incentivize employees without running afoul of, any sort of law. You can even ask the employees, to have their family members vaccinated, and you could even help facilitate the family members getting vaccinated, right? Like you could host like a vaccination picnic or something and invite family members and invite them to get voluntarily vaccinated at the, vaccination picnic. And that is something I've not heard anybody do, but, let's just pretend it's something somebody could do. Let's put it that way. You can't incentivize family members to get vaccinated, but you can incentivize employees, right? And we're seeing a lot of businesses out there incentivizing employers in this return to work situation, incentivizing employees. I think, like I said before, I think that with more and more, with this whole Delta variant and people just kind of like putting their feet in the concrete on, no way am I going to get vaccinated. So, for whatever reason, they're not going to get vaccinated. The question for employers is, what are you going to do about it? If you've got 20 or 30 or 40% of your workforce that's not vaccinated, and you see that as a risk, a safety risk in the office, and if you see that as a risk to your customers and just the overall company, and it's not what you're about, and you want everybody to be healthy and not miss a bunch of time off work because they're sick and all that, can you mandate that they get vaccinated? Yeah, and I think if you've made that call, it's a cultural call, it's a business call, then that's the right call. And a lot of employers, we're starting to see it, especially in the healthcare industry. There was a case in Texas where like 150 or so hospital workers, or Methodist Hospital down in Houston, in the hospital system down there, sued because Methodist mandated that everybody gets vaccinated. And of course, they made exceptions for people that are like pregnant and people that were, had religious beliefs or people that were disabled. So they made all the right exceptions to this. But about, I think it's like about 180 or so of the employees refused, and then most of those sued, and the judge threw their case out because it was silly. And because you can set the terms and conditions of employment. And vaccination, it's not protected by HIPAA, and it's not protected by the ADA, and there's no real protection for your vaccination status. Can you, as an employer, ask about the vaccination status of somebody? Yes. Can you ask to see their vaccination card? Yeah, you can absolutely ask to see their vaccination card. You can't. I wouldn't ask beyond that. I wouldn't ask about the details of their medical procedure. You don't want to get into disability medical inquiries, but But yeah, you can ask if they've been vaccinated. You can take a list of it. You can do all sorts of things around this vaccination issue. And I think more and more employers are going to do it. And you've even seen the frustration from the federal government recently, just in the last week, saying, hey, employers need to do this. Employers, please, the federal government cannot mandate that citizens get vaccinated. I just don't. The federal government, I am, pretty sure does not have that power. So what they're hoping to do, is that employers do it, because employers do have that power. And I don't think state governments have that power either. But private employers do, because if the employee says no, you can just say, well, then there's the door. Like, if you want to continue to work here, this is a condition of continued employment. You get vaccinated. Okay. Just like a condition of continued employment is that, you wear shoes to the office. Okay. You don't want to wear shoes? Fine. You're out. It's not discriminatory. It's not protected not wearing shoes, not being vaccinated, not protected, again, unless you have sincerely held religious beliefs or have a disability. Hopefully that answered a couple questions that we had about vaccination status. And I'm happy to talk more about that, but I think hopefully people get it. So OSHA in May came out with some additional guidance, and the slide here is the updated OSHA guidance for all industries. And the updated guidance for all industries, you can see this big laundry list. And again, one thing to know is that this is guidance. This is not like you have to do this. OSHA has not, and the CDC same way, for all industries, they have not said like mandatory. Like this is mandatory. This is guidance. This is asking employers, saying, hey, this is how you comply with the safety rules that we have under OSHA. This is some helpful stuff that we're giving you to help, some ideas so that you can have a safe work environment. But at this point, we haven't seen like mandates from OSHA telling us that we have to do this, that, or the other. Now, states are mandating it. A lot of states are mandating like preparedness plans and other things in the other requirements that certain states have with regard to like wearing masks and not wearing masks. Most states have gotten away from masks, but I know we're starting to have that conversation, at least in certain parts of the country, about wearing masks again. And so the states might have that, but at the federal level, we just really aren't seeing all that much from OSHA other than guidance, which is really helpful. And then here's the slide that can we ask employees if they're vaccinated, and we kind of already covered that. I jumped the slide gun on it. So some of the things that OSHA put out there, and again, this is guidance, in workplaces with mixed vaccination status, they just, no-brainer, use more caution. Consider people wearing masks. And I do think we're starting to see some employers say, hey, look, you're going to have to wear a mask. You don't want to, a lot of employers, what I had seen is that when people started returning to the workplace in early 2021, and employers were like, hey, the employees are coming back, and we're going to say, look, if you haven't been vaccinated, then we want you to wear a mask. But if you have been vaccinated, then you don't get to wear a mask. If you have been vaccinated, you get to use the break room. If you haven't been vaccinated, we need you to stay in your office or your cubicle. Setting those sorts of rules out. But then the problem is always, who's going to actually enforce these rules? Are you going to, what's your culture going to be? And I think a lot of employers kind of took this like, well, we're going to put out some guidance. We're going to tell people what the rules are, but then we're not really going to enforce it. But then but then a lot of the employees that were vaccinated or are vaccinated, a lot of those employees have been complaining that they, non-vaccinated employees are not wearing masks. And so you've got like Civil War type of stuff going on in the workplace between the vaccinated and the not vaccinated people. And I think it's just going to continue, especially as this Delta variant gets out there and continues to be a problem and people are getting sick. And I think the vaccinated employees are just not going to put up with unvaccinated employees. And so I think a lot of employers are going to start continuing to look at like being a little stricter with either mandating vaccinations or really enforcing these mask requirements. And I, kind of putting the screws to people who aren't vaccinated, and that's their choice. They can do that. There's nothing illegal about it. And you might have your own, personal beliefs on it or whatever, but employers have that power. Whatever your personal belief is, just legally, I'm telling you, the employers have the power to set these terms and conditions and enforce them. So you can, complain all you want about it, but employers have that right. Okay, minimum wage increases. Moving on past COVID. I don't know if we can ever really move on past COVID. I feel like they just keep bringing it keeps bringing us back. I thought we were definitely going to be. I even used the phrase post-COVID world. Like that was so silly. So that being said, I don't think about it really, other than at work when I'm constantly being called about COVID issues. But other than that, in my day-to-day life, I don't really think about COVID. But I know it's a big deal in certain parts of the country, especially. So, okay, minimum wages. Here are the states that had in 2021 increased their minimum wage. And I actually, if you had asked me a few years ago, 2 years ago, if you had asked me 2 years ago, the minimum wage, it was a bigger deal, right? I mean, the minimum wage changes they started over 10 years ago. So all of these minimum wage rules and state laws and increases, they all started about 10 years ago. And a couple years ago, it was starting to be like, oh my gosh, we're moving toward like $15 an hour, we're moving toward $14 an hour. In parts of the country, especially in like the Midwest, West Coast, and East Coast. And we're just moving up into like really like, my gosh, that's a really high minimum wage. And these are state minimum wages, I should say. Like the federal minimum wage hasn't changed in, 20 years or something like that. But now you look at how difficult it is to hire people, and you look at the wages that are being paid, and it's like, oh yeah, this is not a big deal. Like moving to $14 an hour in California, my guess is anybody is happy as heck to pay $14 an hour for somebody. My 17-year-old is making like over $13 an hour as a cashier at a grocery store. It boggles my mind. I was up in the Upper Peninsula of Michigan, which, if you're not familiar with the Upper Peninsula of Michigan, you're not alone. I don't think anybody really knows where the Upper Peninsula of Michigan is. And I love it, but it's like if there's flyover country, like that is that. But like you wouldn't even know that's flyover country. That's how remote that place is. And so I was up there on vacation because it's absolutely beautiful. And I saw McDonald's, and they were offering $500 signing bonuses. And you have to understand, like the Upper Peninsula of Michigan, the largest city up there is like 13,000 people. These are all small towns. I mean, I think they only have a few McDonald's in the entire, Upper Peninsula. And they're offering $500 signing bonuses in the middle of nowhere. Just crazy, absolutely crazy. Like 2 years ago, you wouldn't have I don't think you would have thought about that, but now we're just like begging people to come into work if we can even find them. And we all have our opinions on why that might be. But the reality is we just can't get people to work. And minimum wages, it's not as big of a debate anymore. The move in Illinois from $10 to $11, I think it's a big nothing burger at this point, because good luck finding somebody to work. It's certainly in the metro area of Chicagoland. So good luck finding somebody to work for these wages. So the debate on minimum wage, I think it's just not as big of a deal as it was. And I'll be curious to see if the laws, if any opposition to the minimum wage laws, if they just kind of go away if we get a federal minimum wage that's, much, much higher, if the states down in the South now kind of catch up as well and start raising their minimum wages. I'll be just kind of curious to see if that slack starts to pick up as the reality of the situation of employing people, is that you're not going to find anybody for a minimum wage. So moving on to that, if we're out of line on these, the federal contractor minimum wage increase slide. Very recently, President Biden signed an executive order. Those of you who receive our HR tips of the week know and have probably seen our write-ups on this. And so this was kind of a big deal. And so beginning in 2022, certain federal contractors, it won't be for all federal contracts, but for certain federal contractors, will have to pay at least $15 an hour, and then it'll be adjusted. This is the big one. This is kind of where the debate is, like adjusting it for inflation beginning in 2023. Again, a lot of your federal contractors are probably already paying $15 an hour, but it really depends on where they are in the country and what the nature of the job is. So it might really impact certain people. It's only for jobs that are on the federal contract, right? It's not for just, I generally work for a federal contractor, I need to be paid $15 an hour. No, it's only for those employees that are actually working, pursuant to the federal contract itself. But anyway, the indexing going up in 2023 should always keep the federal contract minimum wage, keep up with inflation. And a lot of states, including Minnesota, a lot of states index their minimum wage now so that we don't have to continue to have this debate about increasing the minimum wage. It's just going to index with inflation. So it's always, kind of like Social Security benefits. It's just going to keep rising with the core rate of inflation. More recently, just the last couple of weeks, President Biden he signed an executive order that has been billed and as this like ruling, no more non-competes in the United States. Okay, that's not the case. Before he took office, the person who was having a hard time saying this. The person who was up for the chair of the FTC, I think this is how it worked out, had talked about how the FTC has the authority to restrict non-compete agreements or restrictive covenants, whatever you want to call them, in the United States. And that was a big deal. And that was one of the first times I had heard that. It was the first time I had heard that from such a high-level figure, that the executive branch might just take unilateral control over non-competes in the United States. Historically, and including through today, non-competes are a matter of contract, and contract principles are governed by state law, which is why non-competes in California use a different test for whether or not they're effective versus non-competes in Minnesota or New York or Texas or Louisiana. Anyway, you've got to know the state to know how effective the enforceability of a non-compete is going to be. But now the executive branch, through this executive order, has asked, I think I actually have a slide on it. Yes. The executive order directs the Federal Trade Commission, the FTC, to examine whether or not they can put restrictions on the use of non-compete agreements or restrictive covenants generally in the United States and because of the antitrust element to them. And so if you saw a red article saying like non-competes are dead, that is not true. That is not true. There is no difference between non-competes today and non-competes 6 months ago, at least at the federal level. Federal government still has no power over them that they've asserted. Will the FTC do something in the future? Maybe. We'll see. It'll be big news. We'll cover it. We'll have webinars and everything on it. But at this point, your non-competes that you've signed are just as enforceable or as unenforceable as they were 2 or 3 weeks ago. And so there's nothing really to know yet about it, other than more to come from the federal government. So we'll see. We'll see what happens. It's a big deal. It's the first time the federal government has looked to get into this, into the business of regulating non-competes, at least like employee non-competes. Obviously, antitrust is a totally different thing, and I'm not really talking about that. I'm really talking about the employment relationship with regard to non-competes. So let's talk about it. Mainly, we're going to talk about the Texas, but we've got a few state-specific updates for you, and then I think we're going to call it. We're going to call it a month, and then we'll be back. Actually, we're going to be back in like 3 weeks. So it's not even going to be that long of a period before our, August 16th, when our next webinar is. So the big one for me anyway is that the Texas Labor Code has been amended, it's been amended, and it'll be effective in September. And it's going to cover more, likely to cover more claims, and it also expanded the statute of limitations. We have, I think if you go to the thompsoncode.com website right now, there is a summary of the law on there. If you receive our tips of the week, if you're on the My HR Genius program, there's also, we sent out a summary last week about the Texas law. It's kind of a big deal. Until now, Texas has really just kind of followed the EOC type of protocol here, but now Texas law has expanded a little bit and given better, more benefits to employees to bring claims, and to bring it a little bit more in line with the federal law as well. So things that employers should always be doing anyway, but now the Texas Labor Code specifically, talks about, is you can see right here, the underlined part, that in a situation of sexual harassment, if the employer knows or should have known it was occurring and failed to take immediate and appropriate corrective action, I don't know what appropriate is, so leave it to the lawyers to figure that out, and I don't know what immediate is either, leave it to the lawyers. Then if you don't do that, then it's going to be a violation of Texas law. Now, it's probably already a violation of federal law if you don't take immediate and appropriate corrective action. But we can see now that Texas state courts, which are definitely, I shouldn't say definitely, but are generally much more political and biased, either for or against employers and employees, because they're so political. If you can get similar remedy in a Texas state court, you can try to pick and choose, as much as you can, your judges and your court, and you might see that as a much better forum than in federal court with the federal judges. So my guess is that the real upshot, the real impact of this change in the Texas Labor Code is that you're going to see more cherry picking by the plaintiff's lawyers of where to file these lawsuits between state and federal court, and they have a little bit better chance of remedy and bringing success in state court if they get the right judge. So that's my guess as to how this ultimately plays out. But anyway, if you want to see more detailed analysis and a write-up, go to our thompsoncode.com website, or take a look at the HR tip of the week from last week from the My HR Genius program, if you're on that. In Massachusetts, the PMFL law started in January. Big deal, providing paid leave. And the Massachusetts program is similar to New York's program, which is similar to kind of the way to think about it is really just like a state-sponsored short-term disability leave program where you get a percentage of your wages up to a certain amount and you get it paid out. Now in New York and in Massachusetts now, you've got public plans, and then also you have the option to get a private plan. So you can purchase your own insurance on this if you don't want to go on the public plan. And you have to, as an employer, you need to contribute The amount that you have to contribute and whether you have to contribute does depend on the size of employer you are. But as a general rule, employees and employers contribute into this plan, and then the employees get the benefits. And in January, some of the benefits started, and then in July 1st, they expanded so that employees can get up to 12 weeks of paid leave to take care of a family member who has a serious medical condition. And then the amount of the leave, of the maximum benefit, and then the percentage is going to change as Massachusetts rolls this program out over the next few years. But this was a few years in the making, this PMFL. And so in 2021, we're just now seeing it. And PFML is similar to FMLA in that the employee gets a right of reinstatement. So you can concurrently go with, do PMFL at the same time that you're doing FMLA. And I guess what I would say is, for those of you that don't have Massachusetts employees or New York employees and, might not care all that much, I would just say this. There's California, Massachusetts, New York. This is going to be, this program, I've been talking about it for years. The structure of this program's treating it like a mandatory short-term disability or almost like an unemployment insurance type of program. This is the wave of the future. A lot of states are going to move to this sort of plan. Minnesota is not alone but it's been before the legislature for several years. COVID kind of knocked out any enthusiasm for it, but before COVID, it was before the legislature multiple years in a row. And I think as we shift away from like a minimum wage debate, and I think as the people like put those signs down and they look for new signs to pick up and advocate for, I really think this sort of plan where you have employers sponsoring, employers kicking in some, employees kicking in some, just like we see with FICA, just like we see with unemployment entirely employer paid, but these sorts of employment roll taxes that fund paid leave, I think it's just going to be something that over the next 10, 20 years eventually becomes ubiquitous, and most states in the country are having some sort of program like this. California, I already talked about the One California law that went into effect for hospitality, but then California also expanded their California Family Rights Act. And again, California, like New York, and California's got multiple paid time off and employee rights. And then this one is just like similar to FMLA in that it allows for time off, but just expands. It just expands who it's eligible for and what the eligible criteria examples for what it would trigger, the time off rights would trigger. So anyway, something to know about California. And then the last one, not the last one, but the other big one is the New York HERO Act. And that just passed recently, and it passed at the beginning of July. And employers have until August 4th. So if you have a work site, this is only for work sites. If you just have remote employees, no worries in New York. But if you have a work site in New York, you need to follow a number of things, including putting together a model airborne infectious disease exposure prevention plan. And if you go to the New York Department of Labor website, they've got specific model plans that you can use. And this plans themselves are industry specific. I've looked through them; they're pretty decent. But if you do have a work site in New York, you need to start complying with the HERO Act in the first week of next week. I guess it's next week. So yeah, beginning next week. So it's kind of the first. New York really doesn't have much in the way of like OSHA, state OSHA rules, and so it's kind of the first foray for New York State to get into this sort of rulemaking for workplace OSHA rules, safety rules. So anyway, if you have a work site in New York, and if you don't know about the HERO Act, you definitely need to look into it because there's a bunch of stuff that you need to do, including safety committees. Here are some other state rules that have gone into effect that you just might want to know about. So we've got some stuff in Chicago We've also got some stuff in California. Kentucky, interesting that they can hire, employers can hire applicants without with criminal records without fear. So it's kind of like an immunity law for employers in Kentucky. I thought that was like pretty unique and interesting, that they were basically saying, we're not going to get you for a negligent hiring case if you hire somebody with a criminal record. So very interesting. Time is up. So August 16th will be our next webinar, and hopefully it'll be me and Letty. I technically I might have trial, so it might be just Letty, but we'll see, and it'll be hopefully we will be talking about, so you want to have better documentation of your employee problems. And so that'll be the webinar. We'll be really excited to put it on, and if you want to register for it, feel free to go to our myhrgenius.co website, or you'll probably get an email inviting you to it. But otherwise, if you have any questions on this webinar, feel free to reach out to me directly at kmosher@thompsonco.com, and I hope you have a nice month.